just going to share, some of the work that we've been up to on this landscape, because at the end of the day, what brings me the most joy is just like participating in the succession of this place and hopefully leaving it better for future generations, and adding more diversity and learning and being able to share, what I learn about this landscape. So these pictures don't all align properly, but we've just got like a few before and afters. And so when I first purchased this place, it was April of 2012. And so that's what we're looking at on the left-hand side. And on the right, we see, I don't know, somewhere, that might be this, I think that is this season. And so what we've really tried to do, Amy and me, is build our infrastructure from the ground up as we go. There was an access road that was already here. We have a shared driveway with a few neighbors, but we've kind of incrementally paid as we went and built. Well, I have that sequence in just a minute, so I'll talk about that in a second. But one of the first things we started with, because we're on a state highway, was with a multi-species kind of windbreak shelter belt planting along the road. And to date, that's probably been one of the most rewarding and exciting things that I feel like I've done in life, is seeing these tiny seedlings begin to manifest and begin to express their potential. And in a lot of ways, I feel like what's emerged for me from this relationship with place is a conversational art piece, is kind of the way that I see it. In part because I haven't had like a set design. It's been very iterative along the way. And I have concepts, a bubble diagram that's been worked out since early on, and things shift. But as I'll explain in a few minutes, or over the next few minutes, each year I learn more, and I try to refine and adapt based on what I learn. So on the left-hand side, you can't really see the trees yet because they're tiny little 6-inch bare root seedlings, but you get a handle for the spacing on the trees. They're very tight. It's basically a thicket that I intend to manage as a bit of a coppice stand, that's also producing berries and nuts and polewood and medicine. And then we're looking at, sort of a similar view this year. And we're on a difficult site in a lot of ways. We get abundant sun, especially for Vermont, but compared to much of New England, we're on the dry side. We get about 32 to 35 inches of precipitation a year, which I know for anybody west of the Mississippi, that's an incredible amount. But it tends to be a lot droughtier and drier than other parts of the region. And one of the more challenging things that we face here is that we're on really dense, heavy clay soils, which are a relic of the last phase of glaciation, which is a bigger story than I'm going to tell here. But we've got these dense, heavy clay soils that do a great job retaining water, but they're also, very compaction prone. And this is a landscape that's been, heavily managed, mostly by haying for at the very least the last 60 years. And so it's taken some time for things to start to go, but now we're getting to that stage. People often talk about the idea of vegetation, especially trees and nut trees, the sleep, creep, and leap phases of growth. And you plant a nut tree, and for several years, it just seems like it's just sitting there. You see very little top growth, but what's happening is a lot of that growth below ground, you're seeing, a taproot that's drilling deep into the soil and anchoring that plant so that it's, well established. The tree creeps along for a few years, and then suddenly, year 3 or 5, depending on where you are, you're going to see it leap, and you'll get 3 or 5 or 6 feet of new growth. And so we've just kind of gotten to that phase where we're seeing the leap, and we can, walk in the shade of trees we planted, and that's been extremely rewarding and really exciting. And so, as I was saying earlier, we've gone about trying to build all the infrastructure as much as possible ourselves. We've hired some professionals here and there, and also benefited from a lot of really great consulting from colleagues and friends that we have. But you see, back in, I think, 2014 or 15, me with the rented excavator at the top of the driveway, realizing there's no turning back. And a few years later, our homestead starting to get filled out, and the high tunnel and some of the other plantings and infrastructure. And I'll just talk a little bit about, kind of some of the iterations of the agroforestry installations here. So that hedgerow I showed a few minutes ago was our 2013 installation. In the spring of 2014, because we didn't really have a clear, dedicated business plan that we knew we wanted to grow any one single thing, we were really interested in starting off with berries as something that provided a quick return. And so we did like about a third of an acre, a bunch of different species, several varieties of each, just to kind of see what did well on our site. And what ended up emerging from that, what ended up emerging from that was that the winners by far were black currants. I have my slides a little out of order here. We'll just go with it as they are though. And at that point, I didn't even really enjoy black currants, but I came to really love them as a fruit. They're super high in vitamin C and antioxidants. They grow wonderfully on our clay soils. It's very easy for us to propagate them for free from prunings that we take in the late winter. And we have a lot of issues with rabbits and rodents girdling and browsing on young trees, and they really don't bother the black currants at all. And so, I came to really appreciate it as this kind of nutrient dense food as medicine crop that's done really well here. And so, for us, some of our enterprises that have begun to emerge on this property have really been this, kind of emergent design of putting diversity in the landscape, accepting feedback, and then, building off of those successes. And I would say that anyone that wants to build a successful business, that's probably not the best way to go about it. Usually you want to really know what you want to do and have a solid business plan and know where your markets are going to be. We're kind of doing that in reverse a little bit here. And in the meantime, my education work and design and consulting work and my wife's work in a local restaurant, are kind of helping to pay for our farming habit. But as each year goes by, we're beginning to see the farm paying in a little bit more and the offsite work needing to contribute a little bit less. I mentioned the infrastructure a few times. We live in a place where it's really easy to build structures on your own. The permitting is negligible in many cases. It's almost a formality as long as you are approved by, or as long as you comply with the local setbacks. So this was more than I needed to submit to our local zoning administrator for the design of this building. And what this building did was it just got us on the landscape. We had no shelter up until that point. And I try to be transparent with numbers when I can. So I'm going to throw some numbers on the board here that just, kind of give you a little bit of an idea of what was involved in this. I hired a friend for a fair bit of this project and paid him what he deserves to earn. But what this meant was basically what we would have spent in 2 years rent for a subpar apartment. We were able to build a space that we lived in, that plastered section, for a couple of years. I had enclosed space for my tools and a workshop, and just a really simple and high quality of life. And what this also allowed us to do was kind of rapid prototype the shelter that we wanted to build down the line. So by building this structure, there's 4 20 by 12 foot bays. So that plastered bit there is 20 feet by 12 feet, about 240 square feet. And so we used that as an opportunity to build, a small scale version of the house that we knew we were going to do in a couple of years. And that was really valuable for us because we got to connect with local suppliers, do a much better job of projecting our costs and, really thoroughly developing a budget for our project. And also just kind of understand and appreciate a lot of the details that we were going to want to pay attention to when it came to some of the energy efficiency type stuff. And so a couple of years later, we started building our house, and we were on the pay as we went plan. And I had learned about building with mud, basically. That was what I was inspired by when I first learned about cob building. I'm in a very different climate here. And one of the things that was challenging was beginning to look at how and where I compromise and what we're going to put energy and resources into. So it's kind of funny that on the slides series I have of our house, most of the materials are materials that pain me to look at, but are also in the right application, I think really, really important, like rigid foam and concrete and PVC pipe in the right context. And so what you're seeing here is a lot of the not so pretty stuff that's essential to, you know, designing and building a structure that's going to last for ideally a couple of generations or more. And a lot of detailing that was easy to overlook until we really started to get into some of those nuts and bolts. And we kept our space really, really simple. Basically, it's just 20 feet by 30 feet with two full stories. We have a 12-inch thick double stud wall with dense packed cellulose in it. That's a floating slab on grade foundation. Throwing out some terminology here, but there are some people that probably you know what all those things mean. We are blessed with some wonderful local sawmills. So while we didn't harvest the wood on site, we were able to purchase it from a mill 10 miles away that gets most of their wood locally. So we really tried to keep things, you know, as low impact as possible, but also as high performance as possible. And then put a lot of care and energy into the detailing inside the house. And it's really comfortable. It's very simple. It's a healthy space that doesn't require much energy to keep us comfortable through our cold, long winters. And fortunately for us, we were able to kind of, like I said, both through some savings, but also paying as we go, keep the price per square foot very low and get ourselves onto the land where we didn't actually have a mortgage on the building. And so that was the way we went about establishing our shelter, got that kind of zone 0 in permaculture speak established, and then, you know, continued to expand off of that. I love experimenting with all sorts of different kinds of buildings. This is one of those projects that has definitely kind of evolved and transformed over a couple of years. But starting last year, I chipped away at building a root cellar on the north side of our house, and so that's another little element of infrastructure that we've been adding. But in this case, what you're seeing is a earth bag retaining wall that's you know, lime plastered. But you're just dabbling with construction and exploring different approaches and creating interesting elements and useful elements of in the built landscape here is also kind of a passion and another piece of the education that we do. And then kind of, as I'd mentioned earlier, each year we've just been, you know, continuing to kind of add to these plant installations on the property. And all of these are kind of patch scale. So for some folks, if you're operating, you know, at the backyard scale, you could take some of these principles and apply them, you know, just around a single tree or a few trees. And at the same time, for folks who might have, you know, much larger farms than what we have, you know, these patterns could easily be, you know, expanded quite readily. So this is about a 1/6 of an acre or 6/10 of an acre black locust with coppice with some nut tree standards installation. And on the left, you can see, you know, the pattern and aerial view using, you know, keyline patterning. And then on the right, you see it, you know, a couple years in. And then this is just, you know, a week or so ago in the bottom right, where you see we have a flock of sheep that are largely just for our own, we raise our own meat, but we also integrate them into our tree crops on the property. And I had mentioned, you know, that we decided black currant was a crop that we wanted to really start to focus on, especially in the short term, because we've planted pear trees as well as a number of other different nut trees, but they're taking some years to get established. And so what you're seeing on the left-hand side was some of the site prep that went in, just basically heavy, deep mulch on top of the planting row, where we have kind of a series of, I think 620-foot rows across another probably 6/10 of an acre, where we have a kind of an alley cropping system, fruit trees 30 feet within the row, and then currants and gooseberries on about 3 or 4 foot spacing in between. And those plants productive. And then we started off grazing the alleys in between. And now in some of those spaces, we're transitioning over to more alley cropping, both for small scale tree nursery, as well as some additional vegetable crops. And just, some images of some of the, rotational grazing that we do. Again, that's really not earning any money for us. That's just part of our kind of homestead resilience, but also, soil restoration and improvement. And, as we started to find some of these niches that we wanted to put more energy into, we decided that we wanted to start a farm more formally. And so we call our farm Valley Clay Plain Forest Farm, which is a mouthful. But it means a lot to us because the Valley Clay Plain Forest is the name for the natural community that once dominated the Champlain Valley, the ecoregion where we live here. And so what we see in the Valley Clay Plain Forest is kind of this ecotone between the oak hickory forests that we find to the south and the northern hardwood forests to the north. And so it's kind of this hyper diverse mix where we're in this unique little ecosystem. And because this is some of the flatter land in the region, this is some of the most cleared landscape. And so the Valley Clay Plain Forest has really been fragmented and in a lot of cases just completely displaced. And so part of our vision for our farm is that we explore multi-storied agroforestry in the vision of creating a Valley Clay Plain mimic of sorts. And so the three crops that we've been really focusing on are, we make a value-added blackcurrant product called an oxymel, which is a blend of apple cider vinegar, honey, and blackcurrant juice. We grow log-grown shiitake mushrooms. And then we've also been doing some on-farm sales of various berries and vegetables. And I'm winding up here, but just a look at some of the more rewarding moments in my life in the last couple of weeks has been just recognizing some of the habitat or the utilization of our landscape. It's our landscape, of this landscape by various creatures, and just kind of connecting to that. The feeling that I got when I first saw a bird land in a tree that I'd planted was really marvelous. And over the last couple of weeks, we had a great blue heron that was visiting us every day, and just working through the landscape, we saw it hunting mice and voles, and that was just really remarkable and rewarding. And I was out earlier today and caught that praying mantis on a blackcurrant plant in this nest in a hawthorn tree that used some of the wool from the sheep that we raise. The yellow spotted salamander near the riparian zone. I didn't mean to do that there. And, again, keeping with that theme of succession, there's a big new disturbance entering our life right now because Amy's 6 months pregnant. And so we have a new one on the way, and that makes all of this work mean something very different. And I know I have a ton more learning to do and humbling to occur, and begin to see how life and paradigms and perspective change as we enter this next phase in our life.